Tonight, Jackie Vernon is here. On stage, he's a really humorous man. Jackie Vernon starred in a cannibal horror film after voicing America's favorite snowman. Then he was gone. The truth about his last years is now becoming out. The Vegas shows that almost broke him, the collection of empty suitcases that perplexed his friends, and the terrible secret his family has kept concealed up until now. This is what actually transpired following Frosty the Snowman, and the reason no one wanted to discuss it. Ralph Vernon was born Jackie Vernon in New York City on March 29, 1924. He was raised in an Italian-American working-class household. His area was full of flavor, but it was also hard. From an early age, he was influenced by his family's ideals of humor and hard work. The city of contrasts was New York. Jazz music could be heard emanating from clubs at one point. A street vendor would be yelling about the tastiest hot dogs in town as you passed them the next day. Jackie took everything in. Stories, humor, and the hardships of working-class existence characterized his early years. He attended a city high school before enrolling at City College. He was being pulled by something else, though. He enjoyed making others laugh. He had a dry, almost drowsy sense of humor. They added humor to even the most basic jokes. Comedy, however, was still only a pipe dream. Everything was altered by the conflict. Jackie was a member of the U.S. Air Force during World War II. Although military life was rigorous, he met individuals from all walks of life. Even though he wasn't performing yet, he observed their behaviors, listened to their speech patterns, and discovered that comedy might help people get through difficult moments. His service experience strengthened his observational skills. Later on, that ability would prove to be his most potent weapon. Jackie went back to New York after the war and made an effort to lead a typical life. He attempted to attend college, but it didn't feel right. He kept hearing the call of comedy. He began playing in local clubs in the early 1950s, but it was not an easy journey. At nightclubs where he performed, the crowd seldom paid attention. He played in strip clubs where the dancers, not the jokes, were the main attraction. On certain evenings, the audience chuckled. On other evenings, they didn't even raise their eyes. Jackie, however, continued. He was not like the comedians who spoke quickly and exuded enthusiasm on stage. He moved slowly and methodically. No matter how funny the joke was, he would always deliver it with the same drowsy smile. It was made funnier by the surprise delivery. He quickly discovered that his secret weapon was his slow, deadpan delivery. He eventually came to the conclusion that he required a new name. It didn't sound like Ralph Vernon was a comic. People didn't remember that. He became Jackie Vernon as a result. It was straightforward, memorable, and appropriate for the character he was developing. He would live the rest of his life with that name. When Steve Allen witnessed Jackie Vernon playing at a Windsor, Ontario, nightclub in 1963, his career took a drastic turn. What Allen saw pleased him, and asked Vernon to appear on Celebrity Talent Scouts, his late-night program. It was his first time appearing in front of a national audience. It changed almost immediately. He began receiving calls from TV producers, received additional invites, and secured appearances at prestigious venues such as the Blue Angel in New York and the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. The greatest comedians performed here, and Vernon showed that he belonged. There was nothing else like his sluggish, deadpan manner on TV. He had a knack of grabbing people's attention, holding it until the punchline, and then surprising them with something totally different. The audiences adored it. He frequently appeared on some of the top shows of the era as a result of his success. He made appearances on The Dean Martin Show, The Ed Sullivan Show, and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. He was able to reach new audiences with every event. He proved he could compete in any lineup by performing with musicians and other comedians on The Ed Sullivan Show. He and Johnny Carson played off one another on The Tonight Show, demonstrating Vernon's quick thinking. His appearance on The Dean Martin Show stands out as one of his most memorable performances. He was more than a visitor. He occasionally served as an opening act for celebrities like Judy Garland and Dean Martin. His career reached new heights thanks to that kind of publicity. He rose to prominence in the comedy industry. Producers have faith in his ability to deliver. The audience knew they would chuckle. However, Jackie Vernon's peculiar, eccentric drawings were what really set him apart. The vacation slideshow was the most well-known. His signature became this routine. He pretended to navigate through made-up vacation slides while he stood on stage with a hand clicker. There was a strange, sardonic caption for every image. His storytelling style was almost as humorous as the events themselves. Always slow, always serious, adding humor to the absurd details. He talked about dropping coins at a toll booth and having trouble finding them beneath the car in one of his slides. In another, he described how he picked up a hitchhiker who drew a gun on him right away. The audience was able to visualize every moment even though they never saw any actual slides. That was his act's genius. It was not immediately clear that Jackie Vernon would be the voice of Frosty the Snowman. He was well known for his slow, dry humor as a nightclub comedian prior to this role. He frequently made adult-oriented jokes with nuanced punchlines that surprised audiences. His mannerisms didn't seem appropriate for a happy, kid-friendly Christmas show. Nevertheless, he managed to become the voice of one of the most adored Christmas figures ever. Rankin Bass sought someone who could give Frosty the Snowman a warm, vibrant vibe when they set out to create the character in 1969. There was more to Frosty than just a talking snowman. He was naive, playful, and enthralled with his surroundings. He needed to sound friendly. An actor with an exaggerated, high-energy voice could have been their choice, but that wasn't their preference. They required something endearing and organic. That's what was so unique about Vernon's performance. He spoke in a steady, serene voice that was full of pure joy. He made no effort to exaggerate the humor or elicit strong feelings. Rather, he provided Frosty with a natural warmth that made him seem genuine. His rendition of Happy Birthday became a memorable catchphrase due to its sincerity rather than being loud or extravagant. Frosty sounded like someone who was content with simply existing. The special quickly turned into a Christmas custom. After it was released, it was broadcast on CBS annually and became a Christmas mainstay for many decades. The success was mostly due to Vernon's voice. His Frosty was amiable and endearing without ever coming across as cheesy or over the top. He gave the persona a timeless quality. In two follow-ups, Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July, 1979, and Frosty's Winter Wonderland, 1976, Vernon reprised his role as Frosty. Through the expansion of Frosty's story in these specials, Vernon was able to give the character even more personality. This allowed Vernon to reveal a softer side of the character in Frosty's Winter Wonderland. The romance felt beautiful and innocent since he played Frosty with the same warmth as previously. Frosty was a genuine holiday star by the time Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July aired. He was more than a song character now. He was as familiar as Santa Claus or Rudolph. No one else could match Frosty's charisma, as seen by the fact that Vernon kept coming back, demonstrating how crucial his voice had become to the character. Frosty's performance was remarkable because Jackie Vernon was an unexpected choice. Although his experience in adult comedy could have sounded like an odd fit, Frosty's voice seemed genuine because of his natural delivery. He did not pretend to be someone he wasn't or overact. He just left Frosty alone. Because of their choice, a straightforward Christmas special became a timeless classic, and Vernon's voice became permanently ingrained in holiday customs. Throughout the 1970s, Jackie Vernon kept himself occupied by doing stand-up and frequently appearing on television. With his trademark deadpan delivery, he had already established himself in the 1960s, and by the next decade, he was well known in the entertainment industry. He frequently appeared as a guest on programs such as The Dean Martin Show, The Merv Griffin Show, and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. These engagements were not limited to showcasing his sense of humor. In a field that was undergoing rapid change, they enabled him to remain relevant. Vernon was a well-liked opening act for celebrities like Dean Martin and Judy Garland. Whether performing on national television or in a crowded nightclub, he was the type of comedian who could charm nearly any audience. His impact on the comedy industry was evident. He set the stage for later comedians like Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg with his slow-paced, dry style. He was more than a mere entertainer. He served as a model for a particular style of humor. But celebrity roasts were the one setting where Vernon really flourished. In the 1960s and 1970s, these gatherings, in which comedians and celebrities alternated making fun of one another, were very popular, and Vernon was a frequent attendee. He was notable for his deadpan delivery. The way he delivered a joke made everything twice as humorous since he kept his face straight. He held his own against some of the most well-known comedians of the era, roasting figures like Ed McMahon and Milton Berle. He could take a joke just as well as he could tell one, which contributed to his effectiveness at these gatherings. He would sit there looking stony-faced as the other comedians made fun of him, then he would make a well-timed retort. It solidified his standing as a master of his trade and made him a favorite at these gatherings. Additionally, Vernon left behind a few comedy albums that reflected his own sense of humor. A Wet Bird Never Flies at Night, 1964, and Sex Is Not Hazardous to Your Health, 1972, were two of the most well-known. His comedy was displayed in a variety of ways in these albums. The first made use of his trademark self-deprecating humor to portray him as an unfortunate commoner attempting to deal with the small absurdities of life. A little more edgy, the second album tackled more mature subjects while maintaining the same sardonic, dispassionate tone. Fans were able to enjoy his comedy long after his concerts ended thanks to the positive reviews both albums received. Then something really unexpected happened. 1979's Microwave Massacre. People likely didn't anticipate this one, whether they knew Vernon as the sardonic stand-up comedian or even as Frosty the Snowman's voice. He portrayed Donald, a construction worker who unintentionally kills his wife and subsequently grows fond of human flesh in this low-budget horror comedy. It was a strange, darkly humorous movie. And completely unlike anything he had ever done. But it was interesting in part because of that. The ridiculousness was made funnier by Vernon's deadpan delivery. When the movie first came out, it wasn't very popular, but it eventually became a cult classic. Because of its strangeness, so terrible its excellent moviegoers loved it, and Vernon's acting was a major factor in that. Vernon used to make jokes about how unpopular he was even as a child. He reportedly remarked, "Dale Carnegie once hit me in the mouth," which encapsulated his distinctive approach of transforming personal tragedy into humor. He thought of himself as a depressed clown. His humor was based on genuine fears, much like Charlie Chaplin, who was able to make people laugh while maintaining a gloomy undertone. Additionally, it constrained him to a particular image even though it struck a chord with people. He was the one who never quite got a break and was always the underdog. And that turned into a strength and a weakness for him. There were two sides to that typecasting. On the one hand, he became well known. In addition to being a favorite on The Dean Martin Show and The Tonight Show, he even voiced Frosty the Snowman in the well-known holiday special. However, it also confined him to a certain niche. The adorable loser was all that the producers saw in him. No one wanted him to be anything else, regardless of his talent. When variety programs began to wane in the late 1970s, the aggravation of being trapped in that image grew even more challenging. Vernon was gradually losing the structure that had provided him with his greatest possibilities. New forms of comedy, stand-up specials, and sitcoms were gaining popularity. The dry, slow-paced delivery of Vernon's comedy didn't mesh well with this new environment. His income fluctuated along with the labor. The abrupt decline was startling for someone who had performed for years at prestigious venues like the Blue Angel in New York and the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. He had voiced characters, appeared in numerous TV shows, and acted in films, but now he had trouble finding consistent work. He had to provide for his wife, Hazel, and their kids. And he was greatly affected by the financial uncertainty. As much as he could, he adjusted, concentrating more on live appearances in venues like Las Vegas, where he still enjoyed a sizable fan base. However, he no longer had the security he had, and he had to work hard to continue. Despite the difficulties, Vernon never wavered from his identity as a quirky, incredibly original comedian with a unique viewpoint. His eccentricities were well known. He had a peculiar hobby that many found perplexing: collecting empty suitcases. It wasn't a haphazard pastime. His humorous outlook, which finds humor in the ordinary, the underappreciated, and the ridiculous, was a perfect fit with it. Even something as basic as an empty bag may provide him with entertainment. There was his kleptomania after that. It's what his fellow comedians called it, anyway. Vernon was known to steal small trinkets from his buddies when he was on tour. Playful mischief, a means of killing time while traveling, was more important than robbery. In the 1960s and 1970s, the comedy circuit was a tight-knit community filled with inside jokes and practical jokes. Vernon blended in perfectly, contributing his own quirky sense of comedy. He was revered by his fellow comedians. They were aware of his talent for viewing the world in a unique way and for making light of ordinary hardships. He continued to be adored by people who recognized his contributions to humor, even when his career slowed down. One of the most significant aspects of Jackie Vernon's life was his marriage to Hazel Sawyer. After getting married on October 27, 1958, they had 3 kids, Tracy, Lisa, and David. They were married until 1987, when he passed away. However, Vernon traveled a lot, just as many other performers of his era. Long tours, much travel, and late nights in clubs were all part of his profession as a comedian. He played at venues all around the nation, including the Hungry Y in San Francisco and the Blue Angel in New York. He was dragged away from home by the spotlight, but it followed him everywhere. While he was away, Hazel kept everything together. She was in charge of running the home, raising their kids, and bringing stability to an unpredictable life. She continued to be involved in her community after Vernon's death and was known for her warmth and compassion. She left behind her children and a grandson called Gage when she died on March 21, 2006, at the age of 77. Jackie's family remained close despite the difficulties his work presented. His kids have talked positively of him in the more subdued times when he was just their dad. He was frequently referred to as a depressed clown by his son David. The comic who makes others laugh while carrying a subtle sorrow of his own is a well-known image. Vernon's delivery was subtle and deadpan, and his humor was frequently self-deprecating. He portrayed the unfortunate average person who was unable to get a break. Although audiences adored it, there was more to that persona. He was probably burdened by the demands of performance, the extended absences from home, and the highs and lows of a comedic career. Charlie Chaplin, one of his greatest influences, served as the basis for the concept of the dejected clown. Chaplin was a virtuoso at combining tragedy and comedy, which made viewers laugh while simultaneously evoking strong feelings. That was why Vernon admired him. He wrote to Chaplin early in his career in the hopes of getting advice or perhaps even a connection. Chaplin, however, never answered. Despite this, Vernon continued to admire him. Chaplin's skill at using body language, facial expressions, and well-timed comedy to communicate stories stuck with him. That similar concept served as the foundation for Vernon's own kind of comedy, which was natural feeling but had a nuance. Vernon eventually met Chaplin years later. He never anticipated what would happen next. Chaplin informed him that he had always kept up with his career. He was also being watched by the man he had always admired. It was more than just a chance to meet an idol for Vernon. It served as confirmation. By the late 1970s, comedy on television was rapidly evolving. The variety programs that had made Jackie Vernon famous were going extinct. Shows like The Dean Martin Show and The Ed Sullivan Show were either changing or coming to an end. Even Johnny Carson's Tonight Show has changed its subject. Vernon was among the comedians who found themselves with less options after establishing their careers on these sites. His slow-paced, self-deprecating, dry manner was becoming outdated. Greater recent comedians who performed with greater vigor and edge drew in audiences. Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, and others were pushing the envelope in ways that rendered more traditional performances seem archaic. Although he was no longer in the spotlight, Vernon's strategy nevertheless had supporters. Health problems might have contributed to his downfall, according to his son David. Vernon had already been removed from popular television for years at the time of his death in 1987. However, those who recalled his heyday continued to view him as a comedic pioneer despite his declining public presence. Vernon continued to excel despite the lack of TV possibilities. Nightclubs in Las Vegas gave him a place where he could continue to interact with people who enjoyed his humor. Although the ambience differed from that of television, he was still able to pursue his passion. The issue was that he didn't regain widespread popularity as a result of these performances. Too much had changed in the comedy world. Television was dominated by younger comedians. And, despite their esteem, Vernon's performance venues weren't as well known. He starred in movies such as Amazon Women on the Moon, 1987, and Microwave Massacre, 1979. However, those initiatives had little effect. Although his performances in Vegas were warmly appreciated, he was gradually losing his reputation outside of those venues. Though Vernon was still revered by those who grew up watching him, comedy had moved on. He seemed like a thing of the past to a lot of younger listeners. His portrayal of Frosty the Snowman was one of the things that helped him preserve his reputation. Vernon's voice grew inseparable from the character, and the 1969 animated show became a holiday favorite. He made sure that generations of kids would grow up by reprising the part in Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July 1979 and Frosty's Winter Wonderland in 1976. Listening to his voice. But there was a drawback to this heritage. Frosty the Snowman was the only thing that many people knew about him. That one role overshadowed his decades of stand-up, his TV appearances, and his cinematic work. It had two sides to it. On the one hand, it preserved his reputation. Conversely, it confined him to the role of a one-hit wonder. Vernon wasn't the only one. Many performers and comedians have been permanently associated with a single role. But the contrast was very sharp for him. His stand-up had a caustic, frequently adult humor that didn't quite fit with Frosty's family-friendly persona. Jackie Vernon's last years were a combination of hardship and tenacity. Since the middle of the 1980s, his health had been deteriorating, but he never allowed that deter him entirely. Nevertheless, he made his way to the stage. Even if he stopped performing as much. For him, comedy was more than simply a job. He was a person because of that. His trademark deadpan style and self-deprecating humor had established him as a mainstay in the business, and he wasn't about to let that go easily. He never lost his passion for performing, even as his body deteriorated. He performed at the Marina Hotel in Las Vegas just before he passed away. It was among his final performances. A reminder that comedy was his haven no matter what was going on in his personal life. He had been making people laugh for years, and he had no intention of stopping just yet. He has previously struggled with his health. He never used them as an excuse, even though they had been catching up to him for years. Rather, he transformed them into content, including his own struggles into his daily activities. He was the type of comedian who could find humor even in the most trying situations. His art became more authentic and relevant as a result. He was more than a joker. He gave his audience glimpses of himself. Despite everything, he remained well respected in the comedy industry. There was no denying his influence. He was considered a pioneer of deadpan comedy by younger comedians such as Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg. They examined his delivery, timing, and ability to say something utterly ridiculous, without ever losing his composure. Jackie Vernon was more than a mere comedian. He served as a model for next generations. Offstage, he found steadiness in his personal life. David, Lisa, and Tracy were his 3 children from his marriage to Hazel Vernon. Even as his job and health changed, his family remained a steady and silent presence. They were ultimately the ones that supported him during it all. Then November 10, 1987, arrived. Jackie Vernon was gone by midday, yet the morning began as any other. He had a heart attack while he was at home in Hollywood. When Hazel came back for lunch after going to work that morning, she discovered him unconscious. When paramedics finally showed up, it was too late. He was pronounced deceased at 12:06 p.m. His age was 63. The comedy world was rocked by the news. Nobody had anticipated it. The day before, Vernon had complained of back pain, but there had been no severe warning signals, no history of cardiac problems, and no indication that something was amiss. To those who knew him, it was abrupt, startling, and profoundly felt. An era came to an end with his death. One of deadpan comedy's finest characters, a man who could take even the most absurd situation and present it with total gravity, was gone. But his influence remained strong. The comedians he influenced carried on his timing, style, and ability to find funny in the everyday. Years later, David, his son, thought about his father's true nature. He viewed him as a depressed clown, like to Charlie Chaplin, a performer who silently carried his own troubles while making the world laugh. Because it was accurate, that image stuck. There was more to Jackie Vernon than just comedy. He was a man who gave others the gift of comedy by finding it amid the challenges of life. That remained the same, even in his last days.